I am Lee Witkowski, the Executive Director of the Kavli Center for Ethics, Science, and the Public. And again, I'm excited to welcome you all to our webinar today titled Neuroethics in Context, Perspectives from Latin America. We have for you today 4 esteemed speakers from around Latin America who will lend their expertise and their perspectives on the neuroethics debate in their region. At the Kavli Center, we work to break down the barriers that exist between scientists, humanities scholars, and the public, providing an inclusive, multidisciplinary framework for understanding the ethical implications of science and technology, and helping science to be answerable to fundamental human interests. The moderator and organizer of the webinar today is Jose Munoz. Jose is a postdoctoral fellow at the Kavli Center for Ethics, Science, and the Public at UC Berkeley, where he's conducting research about the ethical and legal implications of brain enhancement neurotechnologies. He has expertise in the ethics of neurotechnology, neuroscience, applied to legal processes, and philosophy of action. Jose is a member of the board of directors of the Mexican Association of Neuroethics, where he leads the working group Neuro Rights in Ibero-America, aimed at exploring suitable ways of introducing discussions about neuroethics and neuro rights in different countries of this cultural region. He's also collaborated as an external expert in neuro rights with several institutions in the Americas, including the Inter-American Judicial Committee of the Organization of American States, the Latin American and Caribbean Parliament, aka Parlatino, the Chamber of Deputies of Argentina, and the Senate and Supreme Court of Chile. We present this webinar today with the aim to bring the Latin American neuroethics conversation to the United States, Europe, and beyond, and also to foster discussions about the current state of neuroethics that will be culturally mindful and inclusive. Toward this goal, the webinar will be presented in English. We've enabled closed captioning for those who wish to use them, and we encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A, although the chat has been disabled. And with that, I will turn it over to Jose.
Thank you so much, Dia. I am so excited to moderate this webinar today. As many of you know, neuroethics is the study of the ethical, legal, and social implications of neuroscience and neurotechnology, as well as the neurobiological basis of human ethical norms and individual moral values. It is a highly interdisciplinary and independent field, which overlaps with so many, subject areas such as bioethics, philosophy of mind, neuroscience, psychiatry, psychology, artificial intelligence, anthropology, the law. An important question is how can we best address these implications, the ethical, legal, and social implications of neuroscience and neurotechnology. And in this regard, discussions focusing on these questions are happening at the global, the national, and regional levels, but not only reflect how neuroscientific advances can affect people who identify with diverse sensibilities, but also reveal how diverse cultural perspectives can provide novel insights that help advance neuroethical research with global implications. Let me give one example. As of 2020, the largest neuroethics professional association in the world, called the International Neuroethics Society, consisted of 300 members from 28 countries. But despite this global membership, 60% of its members were based in the US, and nearly 85% lived either in English-speaking or Western European countries. So in my opinion, these data make clear one of the pending challenges of neuroethics, which is the inclusion of diverse cultural perspectives in the global discussions on neuroethics. Of course, while diversity and inclusion are desirable values in themselves, integrating different cultural approaches becomes particularly essential for a discipline that studies universal topics and issues such as consciousness, privacy, identity, free will, criminal responsibility, human rights, and many more. Voices from different cultural contexts can contribute novel points of view in order to help fulfill the aspiration of neuroethics to reach consensus views that can promote the moral well-being of humanity. And this is why in this webinar, which by the way falls within the National Hispanic Heritage Month here in the US, we will discuss the current state of neuroethics in the context of Latin American countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. Before beginning with the first talk, I would like to thank all the attendees for their presence and also mention a couple of things regarding the ways in which they can engage in this webinar. First, we have prepared a poll consisting of a preliminary question on today's topic that you can answer right now. I will be launching the poll. Okay, there we go. Please take the next 30 to 40 seconds to answer, and we will be very happy to show and comment on the results during the discussion. Okay, as I said, we will be commenting on the results during the discussion, but before that, we are about to listen to 4 talks by our speakers today. So let me show you. Okay, so here are the talks for today's webinar. First, we'll be listening to Dr. Arleen Salles' talk, Who's Neuroethics, Which Context? Then will be the turn for Dr. Karen Herrera-Ferrá, Neuroethics Beyond Borders, Experiencing the Mexican Context. Then Dr. Abel Wajnerman will be talking about Chile as a neuroprotection lab. And then Dr. Renato Cardoso will speak about the Neurolaw revolution, and especially will give us some perspectives from Brazil. Then will be the turn for a joint discussion. And in this sense, here is the second way in which you, the attendees, can engage with us. You can engage through questions and comments. If you think of questions during the talks, please enter them into the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer them during the discussion once all speakers have presented. We've enabled upvoting as a means to you to know if there's a question that you also want to see addressed. So please feel free to go ahead and upvote those questions that most interest to you. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, which is Dr. Arleen Salles. Arleen is a senior researcher and an executive board member at the Institute of Neuroethics. She is director of Neuroethica Buenos Aires in Argentina and member of the executive board of the International Neuroethics Society. Before joining the Institute of Neuroethics, she was a senior researcher at Uppsala University and the lead of the Neuroethics and Engagement Task in the European flagship Human Brain Project, as well as deputy leader of the Responsible Research and Innovation work package in the same project. Her current research interests include the conceptual, ethical, social, and epistemological issues raised by emerging neurotechnologies, the nature of neuroethics and its potential for collaborating with AI ethics, neuroethics engagement, and the issue of how to integrate ethical and societal considerations into brain research. Arleen, so happy to have you here today with us. The screen is yours.
Good. So thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking the Berkeley Kavli Center for Ethics, Science, and the Public for first organizing the seminar, and second for inviting me to share the stage with this group of colleagues and friends. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues, which are very dear to me, and also to learn from the panel and learn from the public. So thank you very much. Now, my talk, though, will not revolve mostly around Argentina, even though I will mention Argentina, and most of what I say is significantly shaped by my work in neuroethics in Argentina. But rather, I will focus on, in general, neuroethics and how neuroethics has approached the issue of cultural differences. So, as Jose stated before, neuroethics focuses on the ethical, philosophical, legal issues raised by neuroscience research and emerging technologies. And this, of course, includes the questions raised by diverse treatments of neurological and neuropsychiatric conditions. The role of neuroethics in enhancing neuroscientific research is generally acknowledged, even if sometimes reluctantly. The need for neuroscience research and for clinical and or technical solutions to neurological and neuropsychiatric conditions, though, is not limited to a specific geographic regions, nor are the ethical, social, and legal issues raised by neuroscientific research and applications. So when it comes to neuroethics, it's usually agreed that its origin is in the US and Western Europe, and it has tended to reflect, though, some practical and theoretical assumptions that are shaped by those specific contexts. Even further, it has been argued that neuroethics has probably even taken for granted the portability of those traditions across borders. At times, this even might suggest that as a field, neuroethics belongs to a specific region, the global north, and if it is to be used in the global south, it has to be translated. So ultimately, neuroethics needs translation into other contexts. So is this the case, though? Now, there are at present calls for a richer, more culturally inclusive and socially sensitive neuroethics, attentive to the social forces that shape people's living contexts. Indeed, in the context of my work with the different big brain initiatives and the International Brain Initiative, which, by the way, was very much supported by Kavli, we noted in an article in Neuron in 2018 that the ethical issues associated with neuroscience cannot be understood without attending to how different social norms, cultural practices, religious values influence how they are defined, operationalized, and implemented. And we also noted that one pending issue is how to interact and harmonize diverse cultural and ethical perspectives. However, though, this opens a number of questions. Importantly, what is the meaning of this? So, this has resulted, to a certain extent, in a number of attempts to address culture. And in fact, I can mention a recently published book, actually very recently, 2023, edited by Michele Farisco, that focuses specifically on neuroethics and cultural diversity. So, recent neuroscientific studies provide evidence that cultural contexts are fundamentally engaged with the brain at a variety of levels. But what is culture? Now, I am aware that the notion of culture is contested, that there is no agreement exactly on what it means. However, I'm going to take as a starting point, and that's all I need, a definition or an understanding of culture as a dynamic system of beliefs, values, visions, and activities that directly and indirectly, intentionally and unintentionally shape the behavior of a collection of individuals associated with it. Now, as it has been argued, cultures are ethically and epistemically relevant. Ethically because they are connected to ethical values, they inform moral judgments, they inform behaviors. Epistemically because ideally they give individuals the tools to interpret the world, to make sense of it. It could be said that no individual can be truly independent from their cultural context. So the discussion around the best way to address and accommodate cultural differences is certainly not new. It was not invented by neuroethicists, or neuroethics is not the only discipline that has had to face this challenge. As is well known, the general topic of how to handle cultural multiplicity and the potential diversity of values when confronting concrete ethical issues has been addressed in ethics, moral philosophy for millennia. with heated debates, usually revolving around the discussion or the two alternatives, universalism versus relativism, and so on. Recently, the topic of how to approach diverse cultural contexts when addressing ethical, social, legal, philosophical issues raised by brain research and emerging neurotechnologies has been attracting some attention, though, within neuroethics, as I said before. And I think this has resulted in 4 different approaches, what I call the international approach, so international neuroethics, culturally aware or engaged neuroethics, cross-cultural neuroethics, and global neuroethics. And I'm going to explain each, or where I take each to entail. A first step, I think, towards recognition of cultural diversity is found in articles, and actually I included there an article by Sofia Lombera and Judy Illes from 2009, so we're talking already about more than a decade ago, articles that basically call for increased international or increased recognition of international diversity and representation in neuroethics. So an international neuroethics, the way I see it, does not necessarily focus on how culture impacts the examination of normative concerns, but rather it puts the emphasis on how to include more international stakeholders, particularly from poor and developing countries, so that they can participate in the discussion. As a colleague, actually Karen Herrera, has said in a number of occasions, is like, let's invite more people to the party. Let's bring more people over so we have greater representation. Now, this greater representation might sometimes lead to sharing some concerns and to developing strategies to address those concerns. However, it doesn't appear to be the same goal. It's not necessarily that goal. In fact, whether the extent to which and in what sense international participation will lead to actual cross-cultural engagement, promoting understanding of how different cultures and histories shape specific topics of concern is often left unattended. Nor is there much reflection or significant reflection on whether and which cultural differences are ethically relevant and why. Instead, an international neuroethics approach calls for recognizing that the usual suspects do not exhaust the discussion on the ethical, social, legal, philosophical issues raised by neuroscience, and that more countries, both developing countries and developed countries, should be given a voice. So this is found in different ways, different articles, including more recently in books such as Debates about Neuroethics, which, as I said, I think this is an important step. But there are some issues pending, we could say. So while talking about an international neuroethics does not quite equate to greater cultural engagement, calling or thinking of focusing on greater representation, though, might further awareness of the existence of cultural differences and ideally reflection on implications. And this leads to what I would call culturally aware neuroethics. And I have included a number of papers actually that do exactly what I am going to be describing, which is in recent years, there have been several articles from colleagues here, from me, from colleagues in Japan, Taiwan, Spain, and so on, that try to illustrate how a repertoire of local, social, and cultural concerns might influence people's beliefs on the brain, people's beliefs on mental health, as well as their attitude towards the use of neuroscience and neurotechnology for the diagnosis and treatment of neuropsychiatric disorders. And there are some insights to be that one can extract from these type of papers that basically focus on a specific region and try to bring to light, to a certain extent, those social, historical, cultural factors. And one important insight is that, of course, cultural differences may express themselves in different ways. Sometimes they express themselves in the articulation and use of different ethical frameworks, or they can express themselves in how an ethical framework is applied in a different cultural reality. sometimes the differences emerge even before the ethical discussion. For example, in how some metaphysical and epistemic understandings of the issues involved shape the discussion and different valorative concerns. Now, unfortunately, Noah, though, and despite my strong belief, though, that there are insights here and there are important things to take into account, within mainstream neuroethics, these insights often remain unexplored. So while some efforts have been taken in the direction of the integration of cultural perspectives when discussing specific topics, they continue to be the exception rather than the rule. Often, a culturally aware neuroethics appears to entail acknowledgement that there is cultural diversity, but from a disengaged standpoint, without necessarily attending to what is at stake and why. So this leads me to probably an enhanced version of a culturally aware neuroethics. That's why I put them together, culturally aware, engaged neuroethics. Awareness can promote engagement. And this entails more attention to cultural aspects, what they mean, why they're relevant. Indeed, in the Neuron paper that I mentioned at the beginning, when discussing culturally engaged neuroethics, we pointed to the need to go beyond mere acknowledgement that differences exist. In that paper, for example, in particular, we call for the need to develop a cross-cultural approach that aims at true cultural engagement. This meant providing, if possible, a two-way flow of information that really seeks to understand the specificity of people's experiences and ultimately enhances the general discourse. Now, this is the type of work that in my group, we are partly trying to do. We have recently, for example, published a paper on ECT in Argentina. And we did not just focus on what happens in Argentina, but rather we tried to put what happens in Argentina in a dialogue with controversies over ECT in different parts of the world. So the idea was not just to explain, describe what the situation is in Argentina, but rather try to focus on those unique aspects that could be relevant to further the discussion later on, the overall discussion on ECT and the issues it raises. So I talked about cross-culturality. So what does this mean, though, in this context? Laura Specker-Sullivan and Karen Rommelfanger have recently argued, and I put there, this is a chapter in the book that I mentioned before, edited by Michele Farisco. So Specker-Sullivan and Rommelfanger have argued for a cross-cultural methodology that they believe should give prominence to the significance of cultural comparison to do two things. First, to identify similarities against the background of difference, and second, to underscore differences against the background of similarity. This, they argue, would allow a greater understanding of diverse viewpoints. It would allow identification of shared goals. It would allow the recognition that, or let's say self-awareness of one's cultural context, and thus facilitate imagining possibilities beyond one's culture. So a cross-cultural approach is intended to take cultural diversity as a starting point to build intercultural understanding. Now, it is hoped that this type of cross-cultural approach will do two things. Will identify commonalities that's going beyond particular national concerns, and two, when possible, harmonize some ethical standards in order to build a type of intercultural moral consensus. Now, when we start talking about commonalities, we are going towards a global neuroethics. And it is interesting that in a fairly recent article, the Emerging Issues Task Force of the International Neuroethics Society proposed or argued for the benefits of a global vision when it comes to neuroethics. Now, for some, a cross-cultural approach is a condition for a global neuroethics. And I should mention that the term global neuroethics is often preferred to the term international neuroethics, precisely because the term international neuroethics still suggests national boundaries, national distinctions. Whereas in the case of global neuroethics, what we're looking for is, again, commonalities, that things that makes us, to a certain extent, alike. So the term global neuroethics is used to convey the idea of transcending territorial lines, territorial borders. So as I said, the INS, the International Neuroethics Society, called for kind of a global approach that would attempt to identify and articulate rules and norms that reflect common values and a common general vision, or at least articulate a convergent ethical framework that leads to some type of consensus if a first is not possible. I think recently we are seeing attempts at some type of global consensus when it comes to neuroethics. And certainly could be argued that from a moral perspective, this call for neuro rights is a representation of this idea that there are some things that go beyond borders, that there are some things that we all have and we can all understand as relevant together. The important thing of global approaches to neuroethics, and again, I'm thinking also on some other attempts, for example, the IEEE is working on a neuroethics framework that is intended, by the way, to be very culturally sensitive and very aware of cultural issues, but still provide, again, as the term says, a framework that will allow some type of consensual, probably, approach. What is important is that usually those approaches that aim at global neuroethics take those considerations that they present as important for ultimately even upgrading international policies, soft law, and even hard law, as we have seen in the case of neuro rights, and that I'm sure probably Abel is going to discuss in the case specifically of Chile. So what does this show? And again, this is just barely scratching the surface, right? But what does this show? It shows that how to manage, or to better manage, cultural differences within the field of neuroethics is work in progress. And if we want to do it in a productive way, we need to address a number of questions, such as what kind of neuroethics do we want? What is a global neuroethics? When is a global vision necessary? When is it just desirable? Do we always want a global vision? When is particularity important? When should particularity be given priority over a more common global approach? In the meantime, though, I would like to make some suggestions. I think that we should be careful to minimize or deny the importance of cultural diversity. This might lead to complacency. We should avoid, on the other hand, critical acceptance of and respect of any moral experience. It may be patronizing to say that if something in the specific practice is accepted in that place, then it's okay. Because I believe strongly that we as neuroethicists still have a main task, which is to continue to be critical and to be reflective and to really try to work towards the benefit of human beings. I think it would be good to avoid passive acknowledgement that there are, what I call passive acknowledgement that there are cultural differences. And passive acknowledgement means basically to say, yes, I understand, but many times that ultimately means falling into a type of culture washing or culture as a marketing strategy, which is definitely a problem. I believe that it is important also to avoid an attitude of always criticizing what neuroethics has done with regards to culture without focusing on positive steps. So of course, it is very important to understand gaps, but it is also important to be more positive and present alternatives to keep moving forward. In the meantime, what can we do? I think that neuroethics as a multi and interdisciplinary field can, first of all, take a moral and cultural pluralism as a starting point and not always see it as a problem, the problem of multiplicity. I think it might be to our advantage to look at this diversity as an advantage. Of course, granted, it makes it probably more difficult to address some issues, but probably it might enhance the way we address issues. I also think that as neuroethicists, we need to continue to identify morally relevant differences. Not all differences are morally significant. We need to make a distinction between those that are significant and those that are not significant. I think we can continue and we should continue to flexibly evaluate. And flexibly evaluate is because, again, I'm not talking about colonizing. I'm not talking about coming with a hard, strict code to say that some cultural practices are wrong. But still, though, we should give ourselves the possibility to address whether some practices might not be harming human beings and what this means. And by the way, this means not only with regards to other cultures, also to our own cultures, whatever that culture is. I also think that we should create multidisciplinary, multicultural safe spaces of interaction and discussion. And actually, I see this webinar by Kavli as one such space. I think that it is important that we continue to talk about this coming from different, again, disciplines, different contexts, different traditions, cultures, and so on. And I'm finishing. I know that I'm a little bit over. And finally, I think it is important to engage. Now, as you all know, there has been a lot of talk about engagement lately in neuroethics, and I'm a firm believer in the importance of engagement. In a very recent article that a number with which I co-wrote with a number of colleagues and international colleagues, we talked about engagement as key to neuroethics, but engagement not in the deficit model of engagement, engaging as informing, but rather engagement as a bidirectional, inclusive, proactive activity. And in that paper, though, we argue that there are at least 6 attributes needed to truly engage. We need to show humility. We need to show intellectual curiosity. We need to be open. We need to be reflexive. We need to be nimble, and we need to be creative. I think the same applies to culture. I think that we need to be humble. We need to show humility when confronting other cultures, humble about them and about us. We need to be curious. If we're not curious, we're not going to engage. It will just be background information. We're not going to do much. We need to be open to different ways to see things. We need to be reflexive, as I said before, critical. We need to be nimble, creative, try to think outside the box. So I am really looking forward to the other presentation, and mostly I'm looking forward to more conversations on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arleen, for your wonderful presentation and your meaningful comments. It's the turn for our next speaker. Dr. Karen Herrera-Ferrá. Okay. So Karen is a medical doctor with an MA in psychology, a PhD in bioethics, and a postdoctorate in neuroethics. Her work is based in Mexico as a researcher, clinical mental health professional, and as an international advisor in bioethics and neuroethics. She is the founder and former president of the Asociación Mexicana de Neuroética, Mexican Association of Neuroethics. She's also an associate faculty at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and a member of the board of directors of the International Neuroethics Society. Her research focuses on a range of multidisciplinary areas, including ethical, legal, social, cultural, economic, and human rights aspects, as well as policymaking considerations related to the development, use, availability, and accessibility of neuroscience, neurotechnology, and artificial intelligence. Notably, her work specifically delves into underrepresented contexts and cultures, with a particular emphasis on Latin America. Karen, we are glad to hear to your talk.
Thank you, Jose. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Gatley Center for this and Jose for this invitation. It's for me an honor to participate with you, with all these colleagues and friends on this very important topic. Can you see it? My presentation is it ready?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. Okay, so well, I'm gonna talk about a little bit about the Mexican context. I mean, Arleen just made this amazing introduction of the topics. I think it's going to be a little bit like a continuity of what she just exposed. So, well, first of all, I want to just remind all of us of all of these amazing, great, huge projects of the brain from the global north, and how they all of them get together as an international brain initiative, and how they have also their neuroethics working group, which of course they try to address all these social and ethical implications, and specifically how they want to address global values. And here is where I try to make a pause and just try to grab exactly what global and what values means. So taking as an example, the NIH Brain Initiative and the Neuroethical Guidance, we can see that, we can see that the main things that are concerned is like everything to be safe, talking about capacity, autonomy, and agency, confidentiality, avoid malign uses, specific concerns, engaging public concerns, education and dialogue, and hey, just share the benefits. So we'll say like we could agree that this is actually main concerns, and that this could be universal main concerns. However, when we try to move neuroethics outside the global north, we are mindful that every habitat or ecology brings different challenges, but trying to depict those challenges is what is the tricky part. So when we are saying, okay, let's move neuroethics outside the global north, should we take into account the challenges are regarding geography, or the challenges are regarding resources, or perceptions, or needs? So what are the specific challenges that we are confronting here? So for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to clarify some context. I know there are many definitions, and we can be just hours talking about this, but this is like for practical reasons. Let's say that a country is a geographical area that is an independent agent that has a context and a culture. A context means systems, a lot of systems: economic system, the legal system, social system, the ethical system, health system, ecological system, all these systems. It also entails circumstantial variables such as poverty, political instability, violence, and so many others. And also individual factors such as age, gender, race, religion, individual health, migratory status, and others. And here is very important, because I also include the migrants in a specific country. So when you say there's let's say the US, well, yes, and in the US there are a lot of migrants that we need to take into account, even though they are in the same geographical area. And culture, we'll just say that it's a set of beliefs, costumes, attitudes, rituals, habits that characterizes a specific group. So with these definitions more clarified, we need to be very mindful that there are conceptualizations. So the way we understand or we develop a concept, the value that we give to this concept. And I'm gonna put this word that is really, really maybe controversial and strong, but I will say the sacredness of traits that are related not only to the brain and mind, but to the human person, which can be the same, such as consciousness, self, free will, identity, which are contextually and culturally shaped. So I wrote sacredness specifically because in my country, these traits are considered not to be or not to have a biological basis. So that's what I think it's important to highlight that strong word. And with all these conceptualizations, which are different, the result is to expect alternative perspectives on the development and use of neuroscience, neurotechnology, artificial intelligence, as well as the importance of neuroethics as a field, and on the need to develop policy making on regards neuroscience, neurotechnology, artificial intelligence, and neuroethics. And this is very, very important because, as I will talk a little bit later, this will determine the allocation of resources. So if in a specific context, culture, country, not having or not accepting very well a biological basis of the mind, then it will be difficult to allocate resources for research, for example. So when I studied, I had a postdoctorate on neuroethics at Georgetown. So I was like very happy with all this knowledge, and I thought, okay, I just have to bring this to Mexico. But as soon as I started to develop neuroethics in Mexico, I realized that it needed so much more translation that only translate in English to Spanish. So developing neuroethics in a developing country, it has specific challenges and opportunities, specifically in medicine, anthropology, legislation, and bioculture. So what we decided to do is to form an association in Mexico dedicated to neuroethics. The mission of this association is to create a platform, and very important, a platform in Spanish, because one of the main challenges is the language. If you don't know English, if you are not fluent in English, it is very hard. There is no bridge that takes you to neuroethics. And that was very important for us. So our mission is to create a platform in Spanish for intellectual, interdisciplinary, and multicultural collaboration and contribution, with special emphasis on Latin America, to strengthen, develop, and complement global efforts pertaining to the ethical and responsible use of emerging brain technologies. So what we have done on regards of productivity of publishing, this is our first paper on 2019 that we published as a group, and here we were analyzing some issue that was very important on how it shapes the way we value and understand neuroscience and neurotechnology. So Mexico specifically has a very strong historical relationship and influence of Western philosophy. First from Spain, and secondly from United States and Canada, as we have important economic treaties. So this relationship has achieved a syncretism with the pre-Hispanic philosophy. So it's not Western philosophy or pre-Hispanic philosophy. It's a syncretism, and it's intertwined in every level of society of the country. So this will shape specific attitudes toward Western biomedicine if it is perceived as incompatible with all the cultural and spiritual explanation of the human essence. So again, the pre-Hispanic philosophy is a philosophy where, for example, medicine in the pre-Hispanic medicine, which we actually still use and it's currently alive, it is like the medicine, but also the nature that needs to be in a balance so we can achieve health. So that's a beautiful way of looking at life, but also it also has some like not receptive, but some difficult attitudes, which is hard for us sometimes to develop neuroethics and trying to explain a biological basis of the mind. So there was this national survey. We didn't do that. It was a national survey, a federal survey that it was done, and some questions regarding faith and science. And in this survey, they found that 70% of the population that was interviewed believed that traditional and alternative medicine was better, or was more trustable than science and technology. And 40% of the population interviewed perceived technology as fostering an artificial and dehumanized lifestyle. So again, what we see is that this perception will shape attitudes towards a biological basis of the mind that might not be very receptive. Another publication that we got. This is all members of the society of the Mexican Association. So we tried to review and see the term neuroenhancement, because we don't have like a specific translation for this in Spanish. So the first thing is exactly that there's not a term, that it's not a consensus on the term. What we found is that there are the main term, or the more common term that is used is mejora, which is like better. The second term we found was potenciar, potentiates. The third one is a cosmetic modification. The fourth term that we found was like widening. And the fifth one is optimizing. So what we found is that the term enhance was more like a qualitative term rather than a quantitative term. So it was more like it meant like better and not more. So regarding the language as a cultural construct of the term, underlie beliefs and values, because it really means, or it's really understand that as it will improve well-being. It improves, and it's understand that it's only regarding cognition. So you can have some neuroenhancers, but just to learn faster. It is not contemplated to be on mood or to make better moral decision making. So we find that the concerns on neuroenhancement in the Hispanic world were about distributed justice, on personal identity, autonomy, human dignity, and on effects on the being. 50% of these are papers that we found were human. They had a strong humanistic perspective, and also we're talking about religion. And also what we found is that in general, the Hispanic context, it's non-permissive regarding the use of neuroenhancers, despite the wide availability that we have. So we, especially in Mexico, we are produce a lot of this. We are a corridor between Central America and the U.S. We have it's available. It's very easy to get them, and despite that, it's not widely used. We have another paper regarding. We wanted to know what the mental health professionals thought about neuromodulation, specifically the neuroethical concerns and cultural diversity. So we found, of course, concerns as in any other international paper, but the ones that were unique and different were that the professionals were concerned that the neuromodulatory devices could violate dignity or human rights. There were concerns about poor communication with peers, that were not enough platforms where you could go and talk about these concerns. They also thought that there were cultural influence that will be restrictive or were very complicated for people to accept, for example, a DBS. There were a lot of concerns regarding regulation and the oversight in development and use. So mainly the concerns were an intersection of ethics and law. And then we have this other paper where we try to understand if there were different contextual cultural perspectives regarding neural rights. So we thought that maybe one of the issues was to try to have definitions, to work a little bit more in definitions where have like philosophical and scientific basis, such as free will, identity, self, etc. But they were linguistically accessible to society, so they could understand exactly what we're talking about free will, what are we talking about identity, what are we referring to these complicated terms. And again, enhancement, as we talked before, it is complicated, and it's more complicated if we are considering to be a human right, especially because on resource allocation, what I said before, but also on resource allocation, because we have very, very limited resource allocation on mental health. So what are we going to do? Like, we're going to split this small resource allocation. We need to split it and give it also to enhancement. That will be very problematic for a country like Mexico. On regarding neural rights, also, I'm sure Abel is going to talk more about this, but the algorithms that might not be compatible with the way Latin America thinks, like, like not normalizing the Hispanic world with the global north, because algorithms are all developed in the global north. Also, more specifically on psychiatry, on the clinical field, cognitive liberty, for example, how will that work on addiction or criminality? So in general, we think that it's important to safeguard dignity, but that it should be contextually and culturally mindful, responsible, respectful, and inclusive of not only human rights and fundamental freedoms, but also neurocognitive cultural diversity. So remember that I think it was the second slide where I put as an example the NIH concerns on neuroethics, safety. So safety is, could we achieve safety via globalization? These countries, that the one of International Brain Initiative, represent 32% of the world population. That means that the other 68%, which is actually countries that are current or potential consumers of this technology, have not been really included on concerns or possible solutions. The question is, are they the same needs of all these population, the same conceptualizations? Are the perceptions and meanings and giving value on the use of development of neuroscience, neurotechnology, and artificial intelligence the same for this 68% and this 32%? And as I mentioned, we should expect these alternative cultural perspectives on the meaning of being human and neuroscience and technology, but also on how these perspectives are regarding the replication of these humane traits in the form of artificial intelligence. So if we could know more about this 68%, of this perception of 68%, we will have more knowledge, and more knowledge could help improve safety, benefits, and minimize risks and harms. So what I think is that I don't think it's a very good idea to infer universality of values, concerns, needs, and perceptions, but we need to be receptive to other countries' contexts and cultures. And we need to start building bridges, build communication, and build collaboration. And as Arleen said, this is a huge work in progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen, for your mind-blowing presentation. Then we'll go to the next one, which is Dr. Abel Wajnerman, who is an assistant professor at the Institute of Applied Ethics at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile, la Universidad Católica de Chile. He obtained his PhD in philosophy at the University of Buenos Aires and was a CONICET and a FONDESIT postdoctoral fellow. His main areas of interest are the philosophy of cognitive neuroscience and neuroethics, He focuses on epistemic and conceptual issues related to neural coding, computation, and information processing, their relation to mental capacities, specifically perception, thought, and consciousness, and their neuroethical implications regarding mental privacy, personal identity, and autonomy. His current research project from the Chilean National Agency for Research and Development, entitled Exploring the Conceptual Foundations of Neurorights, which began in 2022 and will last until 2025, aims to ground some of the key ethical and legal notions underlying the Chilean framework for the regulation of neurotechnology. Abel, they're so glad to have you here. The screen is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Jose. I thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Let me share my slides. So, are you seeing the slides?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. Well, before beginning, I want to say I am Argentinian, but I live and work in Chile. So because of that, I am part of Arleen's Neuroethics group from Buenos Aires, and I am also part of the Institute of Applied Ethics in the Catholic University of Chile. So I will start. As you have said, Chile has been widely known during the last year in the neuroethics field because it has pioneered the development of a novel regulatory framework regarding neurotechnological applications, which include centrally a constitutional reform bill that modifies number 1 of Article 19 of the Chilean Constitution, adding a final paragraph which states, and I quote, the scientific and technological development will be at the service of the people and will be carried out with respect for life and physical and psychological integrity. This is a concept I want to explore here. The law shall regulate the requirements, conditions, and restrictions for its use on people and shall especially protect brain activity as well as the information derived from it. Crucially, we are now having a political process that will end up with a completely new constitution, hopefully. The first draft was rejected by a plebiscite, and at the end of the year, we will have a second plebiscite in which we will vote if regarding the accepting or rejecting this second draft. And what is interesting is that in the draft, in the numeral 2 of Article 16, in the new draft of our possibly our new constitution, we have something very similar to this constitutional reform. So this is why the discussion of neurorights and specifically psychological integrity and related concepts is very relevant during these months. And also, something else that has happened recently, the last year and this year, during September 2022, Senator Guido Girardi, with the technical advice of Fundación Camanau, filed a protection remedy, which is something similar to an injunction that constitutes the first application of the constitutional reform. And basically, it is an appeal against the company Motive to prevent the commercialization of one of its products, the Insight brain interface, until its privacy settings comply with the requirements of national regulation. The appeal states that the sale and marketing of the Insight device in Chile is an illegal act, as it violates the national privacy protection law by failing to adequately protect the user's privacy and by not allowing the deletion of the user's brain data. And the steps that the disturbs or threatens the legitimate exercise of fundamental guarantees protected by the Constitution, including the right to psychological integrity. And indeed, what what one can say is that the privacy settings of the device indeed do not seem to be adequate to the minimum conditions for the collection, analysis, and dissemination of sensitive information. For example, the device's default settings are that the collected brain data is automatically uploaded to accompany cloud, and this contradicts the basic agreement in the international discussion on mental privacy that the collection of neural data should always require prior opt-in and specific consent for explicitly stated purposes. In this instance, the Court of Appeals of Santiago de Chile rejected the appeal, and because of this, Senator Girardi decided to appeal to the highest court of Chile, which, after reviewing the issue, concluded that, and I quote, with the advent of a new technology that deals with a dimension that in the past was absolutely private and personal, restricted to medical environments, such as brain electrical activity, it is absolutely necessary that prior to allowing its commercialization and use in the country, this technology and devices should be analyzed by the relevant authority, understanding that it raises problems not previously studied by it. And the Supreme Court ruled out that the denounced conduct, I quote, violate the constitutional guarantees contained in paragraph 1 and 4 of the Article 19 of the Constitution, which refer to the physical and psychological integrity of the victims. So, as you can see, through these two significant, but only two examples, in our local discussion in Chile, psychological or mental integrity has emerged as a central concept within the initiatives that regulate neurotechnology. We have seen many other rights that have been discussed, such as the potential right to mental privacy and personal identity and so on. But it seems that the one right that has attracted attention from scholars and lawmakers in Chile is psychological integrity. So the key question, which is the question that we try to answer regarding all the so-called new rights, is what is mental integrity? And more importantly, do we need a new right to protect it? So that's the main discussion here in Chile. So in the last 7 years or so, as part of the discussion on neural rights, there were a number of proposals in neuroethics to reconceptualize mental integrity. Etymologically, mental integrity relates to an individual mental life being, in some sense, whole, unimpaired, or undivided, and the current legal understanding of integrity seems to be tied to the notion of mental self. So we saw that this mental self-related notion was first criticized by the seminal article by Marcello Yenka and Roberto Andorno from 2017, I think. They argued that this right is characterized too narrowly in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 3, which understands mental integrity primarily as the positive right to mental health. That is, as a right which guarantees that people with mental conditions have access to mental health systems and psychiatric treatment. They propose instead to understand it as a normative protection against neurotechnological interventions involving unauthorized alterations of neural processes that might result in the direct harm, physical or psychological, to the person. So, we have seen many other similar proposals, which I cannot review here, but which mostly overlap in the idea that integrity requires some kind of control over our mental states that can prevent potential harm to them. And of course, not any form of control over our mental states is available to us. For instance, we cannot control all of our beliefs and desires at will, and not any kind of harm can be realistically avoided. For instance, everyday interactions with people can give rise to harmful feelings or other distressful mental states. That's not enough reason to prohibit these interactions. So the main challenge in the discussion of this right consists in narrowing down the kind of control and the kind of harm we are talking about. Well, so, sorry. For instance, there have been different attempts to narrow down the kind of harms and the kind of control we're talking about, and a prominent approach, and very intuitive approach, I think, is that unlike other techniques that influence behavior through the presentation of patterns of sensory or linguistic stimulation, neurotechnological interventions can harm us by bypassing our sensory systems. That is, they affect directly the nervous system without the mediation of sensory systems. And although this may be a distinctive feature of neurotechnological interventions, it is not clear why these are ethically or morally different from direct interferences on mental processes. So Sony and colleagues a few months ago proposed this idea that neurotechnological interventions violate our mental integrity only when they bypass conscious rational processing. The intuitive idea behind this definition is that when we regard sensory bypassing as a moral threat, this may be only because information that is perceived through our senses can often be rationally evaluated, and this assessment somehow controls the way this information shapes our beliefs, desires, and character traits. The problem with this proposal is that the rational or reflexive control we have over our mental states is part of our traditional concept of autonomy, specifically what we conceptualize as the authenticity condition. So that is the idea that an autonomous agent only acts on the beliefs and desires that she identifies with after critical reflection. Thus, if this is all that there is to psychological integrity, then the existing right to autonomy is all that we need to prevent these risks. So we need an alternative approach. And I think that some of the ideas, what I think is the local, some kind of a local conception in Chile about what mental integrity is, can do the job in providing a concept that is clearly distinct from autonomy, identity, and other neural rights, and also have the benefit that is already widely accepted in the scientific and medical community. So, well, I have been discussing with many neuroscientists and law scholars in Chile what they understand by mental integrity when they address it in current discussions on national regulation. And the answer I get most frequently is very different from what we see in these international discussions on psychological integrity or mental integrity. They seem to presuppose that mental integrity fundamentally refers to the mental health of the individual. And this is why it very often conflicts with and is distinct from autonomy. And in a situation in which psychological integrity came very frequently in the discussion is in the context of the discussion, the limitation to clinical research in the areas of neurodegenerative diseases and mental disabilities, that was enforced by Law 2584 in 2012. This is a national law from Chile. Article 28 of this law stated that no person with a mental or intellectual disability and who cannot express his or her will may participate in a scientific investigation. Of course, this legislation has paralyzed research for patients who have diseases such as Alzheimer's that require this kind of research to improve diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. Fortunately, this law was modified by numeral 4 of Article 25 of Law 2131 from 2022, like 9 years later, on the rights regarding mental health care, which establishes that an exception can be made regarding the treatment if the inability to consent is a necessary aspect of the treated condition. And many scholars within the discussion of these laws regarded psychological integrity as the key dimension being protected through this kind of initiatives. So we saw that Marcello Ianca and Roberto Adorno criticized a traditional concept of mental integrity as a positive right to mental health. They contrasted this notion with a negative right to mental integrity that protects people from neurotechnological interventions that may result in direct harm to the person. But we saw that the problem was that there's no appropriate way to narrow down the relevant kind of harms we are talking about. And I believe that the negative dimension of the right, which Marcello and Roberto are trying to articulate in this article, could be informed by the positive version of the right. Following what seems to be what I'm beginning to regard as the local or Chilean perspective of mental integrity, we can understand this right as a positive right to intervention that restore mental health, and as a negative right protecting people from interventions that threaten or undermine also mental health. So I believe that under this view, mental integrity can be appropriately distinguished from other relevant dimensions such as autonomy and identity. I will say a little bit more about this. So the connection between mental integrity and illness was more or less direct under classical views on mental health. This was a view that a healthy mind is a unified or harmonious soul whose rational and non-rational elements achieve unity. In classical philosophy, current approaches depart from this view, but they may still provide a characterization about what is for a mind to be in an appropriate state in some sense. Many current approaches to mental disorders emphasize two groups of traits. One is associated with suffering, distress, and psychic pain, for instance, and the other with disability, incapacity, and dysfunction. For instance, the naturalist conceptions of disease claim that diseases are departures from natural functions of organ systems that are harmful or detrimental to human well-being. So the naturalist view I will endorse here provides a two-stage picture that involves biological facts about malfunction and the normative judgment that the person with the malfunction is suffering in some way. So under my view, mental integrity protects people from a specific class of harmful interferences on mental processes. Namely, those that produce harm through undermining the biological function of neurocognitive mechanisms. Notice that this characterization does not involve any notion of control over our mental states, therefore facilitating the distinction between autonomy and integrity. So let's see how this works by considering a situation in which we can prioritize mental integrity over autonomy. So suppose that a DBS application for treating depression inhibits negative mood in a patient, and that for some reason the patient values this mood, this negative mood, and regards it as a constitutive part of who she is. That intervention, it may undermine her autonomy. However, DBS is known to improve mood by normalizing activity within dysregulated neural networks, thus restoring neurocognitive function, and ameliorating the distressful symptoms associated with major depression, for instance, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, recurrent thoughts of death, and so on. So it can be regarded as contributing to protect mental integrity despite undermining autonomy. And I also would like to end with a similar case based on evidence Well, this is not a formal study, but it's an impression from my experience regarding this issue in Chile and Argentina. People in Chile and Argentina have very different attitudes toward pharmacological treatment of children. In Chile, pharmacological treatment is very common, and in Argentina is much more stigmatized and is avoided by parents when possible. However, in both cases, it seems that mental health, therefore mental integrity under the proposed conception, is prioritized over autonomy. In Argentina, very frequently, medication is withheld even if the child feels more like herself or identifies with the states she experiences with the medication. By contrast, in Chile, very frequently, medication is supplied even if the child feels more like herself or identifies with the states she experiences without the medication. So this is an interesting contrast that shows another situation not related to neurotechnology, in which we seem to prioritize mental integrity in this sense over autonomy. I believe that a mental health approach to psychological integrity is a way to ground the notion in what seems to be a prominent view in Chile, articulate a clear distinction between integrity, autonomy, identity, and related concepts, and can help to understand the trade-off between these rights and how this trade-off is approached in different countries. So this is, I take this to be a case of culturally situated, I mean, like a case of culturally situated conceptual analysis, in this case of this concept that is beginning to be very important in our local discussion, which is mental integrity, and try to put that cultural or local conception of psychological integrity in dialogue with the international discussion, current discussion on this very concept. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Abel, for your wonderful presentation. And now is the turn for our last speaker today, which is Dr. Renato Cardoso. He's an associate professor of law and the vice dean of the neuroscience graduate program at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. He is head of the Neurolaw lab called LAND, L-A-N-D. He was a visiting professor at the University of Ghent from 2019 to 2020, and he also was a visiting researcher at the University of Barcelona from 2013 to 2014. He's going to give us a talk about the neural revolution and perspectives from his home country, Brazil. Renato, it is a pleasure to have you here today, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so first of all, I'd really like to thank the Kavli Center, and especially Jose for this invitation. That really, it was a very happy day when I got this invitation to be here with Arleen, Abel, and Karen, and Jose, of course, and which I deeply respect and admire. So I will try to bring a little bit of the Brazilian landscape in neuroethics and talk a little bit about some of the topics that haven't been yet talked. There was some overlap with all the other talks, but I will try to make it a little bit more about Brazil and a little bit more about Neurolaw, so that we can have a little bit more of a different perspective. So I'm Renato Cardoso, and well, these are my affiliations. I'm from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and head of the LAND, Laboratório de Neurodireito. It's the Laboratory of Neurolaw. And at the neuroscience program at UFMG as well, and the law program, graduate program. And tomorrow, and I have to say this, we will be landing the INCT. This is the National Institute for Science and Technology on neurotech, responsible neurotech. It's called INCT Neurotech R. It's responsible neurotechnology. So it's an institute. It will be very, very important, I guess, to discuss all these future applications of neuroscience and neurotechnology using a responsible research and innovation framework. So I will be trying to talk a little bit about this as well. I think it's an important paradigm and a nice shift in the way neurotechnology has been done here. So very excited about this. Okay, so when we talk about neuroethics in Brazil, I could not help myself but to bring this concept that might not be very familiar to the foreign crowd, but to Brazilian academics, and maybe not Brazilians in general, but certainly to people that study Brazilian economics and Brazilian social structure. It is a very common term. It's Belindia, and it was not coined by Basha as an economist, but he certainly popularized it in '74. And what is this about? What is Belindia? This is a metaphor for Brazil, okay? And I think this metaphor applies very well to the neuroethics landscape in Brazil. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that we have in Brazil a very, very large country, a very, very large population, and some very, very wealthy people that have access to very high-end not public services, but health services and, cultural services, and that are really integrated in world technology and culture itself. And there is a huge, there is a huge part of the population that it's very much integrated and has access to all the neurotechnology we can think about. And we have some great centers. I'm going to talk about this in a while. But the problem is there is another big part of the population in Brazil. It's over 220 million people now, something like that, I guess, around that number. But there is a very, very large part of the population that has no access at all to anything like this that we are talking about. So mainly when we talk about neuroethics, we can and we should keep on talking about high-end and top-notch neuroethics. And these questions are important to Brazil as well. We have, large centers studying and developing BCI, brain-computer interfaces, or optogenetics, or neuromarkers, and neuroimaging from top rank. But there is another question, which I guess it's even more important, which is access to basic neurotechnologies, or even simple health medicines that are really even very cheap nowadays that the growth of the population don't get. We'll talk about this in a while. But this is the Belindia thing. We have a part of the population that have levels of wealthness and services that equals those of Belgium, which is very, I've been there, lived there for a while, very rich and great welfare state country. But we also have a very large population, and this is what they call India. But no, not this is no demeanor to India, okay? But this is the expression, but in which a large part of the population does not have access to this kind of stuff. So let's talk about Brazil one then, the high-end neuroscience and high-end neurotechnology. I've brought some of them just to make an example. I have a lot of friends that are going to be mad at me because of this slide. I'm very sorry I couldn't fit all of the centers, all of the labs, all of the friends that are doing high-end neurotechnology. But I mean, just to show a few, this is my lab, so I had to bring it. But we have very, very important labs. We have, for example, the Instituto Dor that is doing fMRI on ethical decision making and morals and neuroscience of values and emotions. They're doing a great job. We have the Institute of the Brain in the northeast of Brazil, in Rio Grande do Norte, which is doing a lot of interesting stuff, pioneering a lot of BCI. We have here at UFMG more than 10 labs dealing with different aspects of neuroscience. We have the NMC, the NeuroDev. We have the Center of Technology in Molecular Medicine, which, you know, they do all stuff from PET scans to neuropharmacology. And there is this one that I can't forget to tell you about. Now in UFMG, Professor Frederico Garcia and colleagues from the faculty of medical school, they are developing from mental health. They are developing a vaccine to help prevent cocaine and crack abuse. And this has generated a lot of repercussions, a lot of discussions, ethical discussions as well, but it's seen as a great hope for treatment for a lot of people nowadays in Brazil. And so this is very, very high-end neurotechnology as well. They do antibodies that will prevent these substances to cross the blood-brain barrier. So this is very promising research. I discussed some of the ethics on that. So this is all to say, there is a lot of centers in Brazil that are doing neuroethics and are discussing in the same level as those in Europe, as those in the United States and Asia and elsewhere. And it is important. And these are great colleagues, and they have funding. Sometimes they get international funding as well. But there is the other side, and this is the one that worries me most, okay? And the federal universities, they do a great job in doing their research, but we have the neuroethics in Brazil too, right? And as a disclaimer from the start, I have to say that we have a great universal health system, all things considered. Our universal health system is called SUS, Sistema Único de Saúde, the system of health, the United System of Health, and it is truly universal and free and public and for all, and they do a lot with the resources they have. It is the biggest program, universal health program in the world, as I've come to understand. We have had one of the most, if not the most successful vaccination programs in the last century, which is very ironical because we are now a very anti-vaccine country for political reasons. We had an incredible disarray, incredible failure on vaccination because of political reasons during the pandemic, and this completely trashed our health system vaccines wide. So, well, what are we talking here in terms of neuroethics? First, there is poor funding. If you look at the numbers for mental health in Brazil, it is sometimes absurd what we have. And one thing that it's important, if you look at Belo Horizonte, where I am, which is the third biggest city in Brazil, third richest city in Brazil, it's not bad at all. If you go to São Paulo, I mean, in some places it is, but you will get access. But Brazil is a continent, and you will go to a lot of the interior of Brazil or the Amazon or a lot of places in the northwest of Brazil, northeast of Brazil, and you won't find enough near sufficient resources. I mean, I came to understand that in the entire Amazon state, which is one of the biggest, if not, it's the biggest state of Brazil, they had but one center for intensive care when the COVID epidemic started. So there is poor funding all around, and it's very, very badly distributed. And it's hard for me to talk about deep brain stimulation and ethics of deep brain stimulation when the gross public, they have access to one antidepressive that is from the 80s. I mean, the entire population of Brazil, if you go to the public health system, the public psychiatrists, they have one kind of antidepressant to prescribe. And if that doesn't work, my friend, yeah, that's up to you. And we know how that works. And there's a lot of different medicines. There are cheap, that are not at all expensive or high-end, that could have been incorporated into the public system already and are not. We are having a lot of discussions about ECT as well. Professor Arleen showed her text. She kindly sent me her text. I'm going to talk to her a little more about the ECT. It is a big question here in Brazil as well, depending on the city you are, for ideological reasons. Even though you need it a lot, you won't get it. I mean, if you have the money to pay for a private ECT, you can get it, but not publicly. And I mean, there are a lot of inequalities, so inefficiencies, and of course, anti-scientism. And science has been under attack in Brazil for in the last government, especially in the last 4 years. I don't want to politicize this too much, but I have to. We had during the pandemic, we had a government that did not believe in science at all. And they openly disregarded science and lockdown and masks and vaccines and all of this. And I mean, a lot of people have died needlessly because of this. So it's hard to talk about high-end neurotechnology when you have a whole public policy structure that does not care about evidence. And I mean, that when you could do so much with so little resources. And I mean, of course, we have to still keep talking about all these things, but I think that a lot of Latin America has the same problems, okay? And well, in saying this, I really have to talk about one thing that it's important in Brazil, and one thing that I think interests the American debate especially. And this is, well, first, the need for cross-cultural studies. And I mean, everyone knows about the replication crisis in psychology and in neuroscience. And I do think that we really, really, really need a lot of cross-cultural studies, more cross-cultural studies, because, and this is from firsthand experience, okay? There are a lot of a lot of experiments and a lot of findings that are very solid in the weird world, in the United States, that they find it in Europe. And then when we try to replicate here in Brazil, stuff that has been replicated in several countries in Europe and several universities in the United States, and you think, okay, so let's see how this works in Brazil, how big this effect will be in Brazil, and you don't find any effect at all. Okay, especially when we've been working with effects of beliefs in free will and this kinds of stuff, effects of disgust and the normativity. So there are a lot of cultural differences that we really should be looking into, and this kind of research just hasn't been, it's not done a lot here. So I do think that before trying to find universals, and I mean, there are a lot of claims about the universality of the findings that we get from experiences in the global north. We really should try to replicate this in the south before claiming any kind of universality. And there is the question of language as well that Karen brought, and it really translates to Portuguese as well. There is very little in Portuguese, and so we have to make a big effort to translate neuroethics into Portuguese so more people can understand and know what is going on. And I think this responsible research and innovation paradigm that includes gender-wise, race-wise, and all these kinds of economic-wise, all these kinds of different perspectives, it's definitely a question for neuroethics. There was an editorial in Science about in June, I guess, and the name was "It Matters Who Does Science," and I deeply believe that. I deeply regret the recent decision of the Supreme Court in the United States, and I have to bring, just to close, the Brazilian experience on this, on affirmative action. We have a very strong affirmative action policy in Brazil for entering universities. So in Brazil, about half of the places in public universities, in federal universities, which are by far the best, where the best research is done. Now, since it's 10 years, more than 10 years now, half of the places in these universities, it's for affirmative actions, be they indigenous people, race, be that low-income people. And what we have seen is 10 years on is that the quality of the university has not dropped at all. And when we test the students that got in this 50%, sometimes what we see is that when they get in, they are a little below the average, but in absolutely the vast majority of researchers, when they end their grad courses or their undergrad courses, they are at the same level as everyone else, or in most cases, slightly above. So affirmative action has been proven to be very efficient in Brazil. And now more than half of the postgrad programs, the doctors and master's programs, have also some kind of affirmative action. And this is being very important for neuroscience because it matters who does neuroscience. It matters inclusion and all this stuff. So I really regret the recent decision they had in the Supreme Court in the United States lately. I mean, I know it's a very touchy subject, but the experience in Brazil has proven that it widens up the discussions and the research topics, and I think we should even have more of that. So I would really like to talk a little bit about the Neurolaw revolution, but Abel has talked about Chile as well. We recently, in 2023, now have a proposal for constitutional change in Brazil to include neurolaws, but it's still very incipient, very new. And I want to end with a call for a need for an international neurolaw, because as in other aspects, if you do not have an international effort for regulation, those that do not participate will assume they will have some kind of advantage, but in the end, we will all be worse on this. So I don't think we can think about neurolaw only in terms of national states. And I really, really like the pioneer efforts in Chile, but I think this has to be a global talk, and a much needed global talk. Anyway, thanks a lot for having me, and it's been an honor to be here.
Thank you very much, Renato, for your fantastic talk. Now it's time for discussion. We are running a little bit late if we think about the schedule we have planned. But anyway, we have maybe 30 minutes for discussion, give or take a couple of minutes. We have also a bunch of questions and comments in the Q&A box. And I also have a couple of questions for you. And there's the poll, so there's so much going on. But we'll try to discuss all of the questions. Okay, so first of all, if I am not wrong, as far as I can remember, all of you have been visiting scholars in the US, in Europe, besides your work in Latin America. So how have your own experiences, your own professional experiences in different parts of the world, how do you think they have contributed to your particular understanding of the issues related to contextualization of neuroethics? I mean, what important differences have you observed in terms of approaches and ways of working and so on? You can, if you want to answer to this, you can do it in the same order that you used in your presentations.
Okay, so that would be me, I guess. I think one's experience significantly shapes one's views on all issues, and certainly in this specific on this specific topic as well. In my case, I was already quite influenced by my previous work as a bioethicist living in the States, because I immediately became quite sensitive to what I saw as types of stereotyping, which, by the way, went both ways, because I would go to Argentina and do bioethics in Argentina, and there was the stereotyping as well. So I saw kind of an equal opportunity stereotyping, and that made me quite aware of the need to understand each other. But in the case specifically of neuroethics, for almost 10 years, I was in the context of a very working for a project that was by nature international, because this was a European human brain project that included a number of countries. And I would say that my experience there, not only because I was in Europe in a specific geographic area, but also because it was in a specific context of a big project, as Karen pointed out before, right? The context of projects might be different from the context of a small lab in a country, even in Belgium. You know, I mean, so this was a very specific context. I was lucky enough that this allowed me to be in constant interaction with people from the other brain initiatives, not only from countries within the EU, but also with other brain initiatives such as Japan and China and Australia and Canada. And that meant that for me, that very much influenced my thinking regarding the need to engage. They need to be open. They need to be humble. As I said before, they need to really listen to what others are saying and how they're saying it and why they're saying it. So the short answer is absolutely, it did influence my thinking on this a lot and continues to influence it.
Okay, I guess it's my turn now. Okay, the first lecture that I give in Mexico regarding neuroethics, I was of course very excited with all this information that I thought it would be very useful. I'm a physician, so my first lecture was in a medical with a medical event auditorium. So when I finished, the first question was from a psychiatrist that was working on a jail, a federal jail, with prisoners. And he said, well, everything that you have studied is so interesting. It seems that it's very important, all this advanced neuroscience and the ethical reflections and whatever. But I am so disappointed because I was hoping to have some information that will help me right now because I'm going to see my patients. And I have electroencephalogram that is 30 years old. And you talk only about innovative neuroscience and neurotechnology and all this incredible stuff. I have concerns regarding if this old electroencephalogram is going to be accurate for my patients. I wanted to take something right now. And all of that you said, everything you said is not useful for me right now. And then another person said the same, like, yeah, this is so nice, interesting, but I needed something that I could bring to the battlefield. That means, with the patient to be useful right now. So what I learned from that moment and through the years that I was trying to bring neuroethics to Mexico is that what we really need in my country first is to attend emergencies, like clinical emergencies and with lawyers on the criminal area. So that was shocking for me. So I tried to start doing, instead of doing neuroethics from the Great Brain Project to solving problems, it had to be the other way. So seeing how I can solve these problems or immediate problems, and then explain how it's working in the world, all the development of new techniques. So that's what happened in Mexico. That's why I tried to do first with physicians and lawyers, and still working on it, trying to make sense and but it was more like practical or clinical neuroethics, and also at the same time bringing all the conceptual issues. I hope that it helped my answer.
Thank you, Karen. What do you think of it?
Well, I will talk from my little experience. I think that there is a common ground in Argentina and Chile, where I found like some key differences regarding how we approach mainly two issues. The first is what attracts attention towards thinking about diversity or differences in the South is very different from what I saw in the US, for instance. There are cultural differences, but inclusion and diversity is mostly focused on social or economic differences rather than cultural differences. That is the main, and also difference regarding how people see these economic or social differences, how they want to approach it, and so on. So those are the main divides here, I think, in Argentina and Chile, more than cultural differences. That's one point. And the other one is that I'm not sure about this, and perhaps Arleen can tell me if she agrees or not, but I think that there is a kind of more emphasis in well-being, so to speak, rather in contrast to freedom or autonomy. and also an emphasis in relational aspects such as family, friends, institutions, and so on, which I see in many discussions here. That's why the notion of psychological integrity I try to articulate tries to reflect that impression, that the idea that there is a core value that goes beyond beyond protecting our own liberties. I mean, the battle for our brains is the battle about protecting our well-being rather than the liberty of ourselves as persons. So that's a first impression.
Thank you.
Okay, so for me, it's basically two things. I first, not the first, the big experiences I had were first in Barcelona and then in Belgium, but they were very different in themselves and very different from Brazil. So what were they different from Brazil? Both of them, and that really taught me something. There was a big difference in how people saw academic work and academic life. There is a much more lab meeting culture, more discussing culture, and people would meet and talk about their projects and everything. Here in Brazil, for example, it would be a much more vertical thing with the professor and several students, but not in research groups so much. And this is something that I found fantastic, and I really tried to bring. I still have a lot to do, but this really made open my eyes to a different way of doing things. But and also the very professional way in which academy and doctors and PhD candidates and postdocs, and they are taken, because here in Brazil, I mean, in some areas it's not like this, but in a lot, people have another job and they think that's just normal. They don't have funding, so they will be lawyers and will be finishing their PhD. They will be professors of philosophy while finishing their PhDs or while doing their postdocs. And so this professional mindset, I mean, I'm doing my PhD, I'm doing my postdoc, that is very something we should aspire to here, and not being second place academia. But the other thing that really struck me more than cultural things is that different disciplines and different, interdisciplinary stuff, that really changes a lot. Because I was in Barcelona and I came from law school and I was teaching and researching neuro rights. And then I went to Barcelona to a philosophy school. So I was in the philosophy faculty. And then some years later, I was in Belgium in a neuroscience lab. And I was doing neuroscience in law school, in philosophy school, and in the neuroscience lab, but in very, very different ways. And this is really what really struck me. And sometimes it's hard to understand how different neuroscience can be in its various forms.
Yeah, it is. Obviously, it is one of the main challenges with we deal with in our discipline, right? Neuroethics is highly interdisciplinary, and there's so much to do about different issues, different topics related to so many areas, so many ways of work. There's a bunch of questions in the Q&A box. Let me read a couple of them for you. There are two of them that are pretty much related between them. One attendee says, how do other countries and cultures in Latin America view the Chilean example of neuro rights? And this relates with another question. which is, although Latin America shares many cultural perspectives, there are also many differences within the region. And what are some similarities and differences that have an impact on how neuroethics is viewed and understood? What do you think about these differences in cultural context between different Latin American countries, especially regarding this maybe trendy topic of neural rights? What do you think?
If you don't mind, I'm going to start with the first part, or one of the parts of the question, and then others can really focus more on neural rights. I think that one of the main things to realize from the beginning is that cultures cannot be essentialized. One problem that I see many times is that cultures are taken to be like a homogeneous whole, where there are no subtleties, there are no difference. And I think that we have to be very careful there. And if there is something that working in different places taught me, is precisely that you're going to find a lot of difference within cultures. Now, the first question was but there are differences between Latin American countries. Indeed, there are different perspectives, and there are different perspectives even within one country. I don't think Argentina, if you come from Buenos Aires, your worldview is different from the worldview of somebody who comes from Tucumán. But I think that it is possible to start by making a distinction between something that appears to characterize Argentina. In Argentina, there is a significant psychoanalytic movement, and there is a very strong feeling within the population, to the extent that I think it's uncommon to find somebody who doesn't go to therapy. I mean, to that extent, it's not unusual to go to therapy. It's almost unusual not to. So I think that has definitely shaped, and I have argued that in a couple of papers, I have definitely shaped the discussion of neuroscience. It benefits particularly when talking about neuropsychiatric disorders. I think that the discussion on solutions to neuropsychiatric disorders has been significantly impacted by this psychoanalytic emphasis within the region. And in fact, it is true that Argentina is one of the countries where you find the most psychoanalysts. So there is even data that shows this prevalence. And I think that is really significant when addressing a number of issues that neuroethics focuses on. Now, regarding your rights, I think I would like to give the word to those who have specifically focused on your rights in Mexico or Chile or Brazil. So, thank you.
Thank you, Arleen.
What Arleen just said, we have been talking before, that I was very amazed at how receptive Argentinians are to therapy. So in Mexico, it's completely different. I am also a cognitive behavioral therapist. And if I am, any Sunday, just going through a shopping mall or whatever, if I find a patient, I have to wait for him or her to approach me, because the first time I approached my patient, he was so ashamed. He didn't know how to introduce me to his friends. He had no idea how to justify my presence in his life. So because he didn't want to say that he was attending to therapy. So for example, another example of how complicated it is, sometimes outside the office, I just put my name and it doesn't say anything regarding mental health. So the stigma it's really it's really alive, and it's really complicated and shames not only the patient but the family. So it is very, very complex. And again, this is Latin America. Latin America is not the same. We have a lot of things in common, but also we have a lot of differences. And regarding on neural rights, there are currently movements from senators and from senators trying to understand what is artificial intelligence, which are exactly, or what do they mean with these neural rights. They are holding these events, trying to understand to academics to explain, scholars to explain to them what does this mean? How should this be regulated? If this is compatible with the Mexican Constitution. So right now we are on top. I am in this group, so we are actively talking regarding informing the policymakers regarding this. So that's that I think Abel and Renato have more active information regarding this.
Okay. Any further thoughts on this question?
So one word about Chile. I found those differences that Karen and Arleen mentioned fascinating. In Chile, I have been living in Chile for 5 years now, so I'm not an expert, but what I have seen is that at least university students are very open about mental health issues. But I think that has to do with, it's not something cultural, it's something that is more related again to the economic context, because they feel a lot of pressure about academic lives regarding the economic conditions of they have to sustain to have a successful academic life, and so there are a lot of reported issues regarding mental health. This week we don't have classes in any university, I think, or most universities in Chile, as a strategy to lower the stress for students. That's one thing. And the other one is that I like what Karen mentioned, what happened about Mexico and drugs from pharmacological interventions. Here in Chile, they are very, very common. The students at mostly university students, they use all kind of drugs for health issues and also for enhancement. They both are very common, and also for children from very young ages, it's very common to give them drugs to treat different kinds of conditions, and that is very different from Argentina, because in Argentina, I don't know, from my experience, they are very skeptic about the goods that drugs can do to kids, and so they are very reluctant to provide them. So that they have like a general idea about those differences. But I stand with the idea that in both cases, there is a major concern related to well-being behind those reasons.
Okay, I will chip in really fast because I feel I've talked too much already. But as long as neuro rights is kind of my cup of tea, I have to say a few words. I'm really excited. I have been excited for a long time with Chile's experience, and I think all this discussion in Chile has prompted a lot of discussion in the field, but also I do think there is a lot of hype and a lot of rushing in, a lot of legal instruments that haven't been as well thought as they should have been, and sometimes I feel the presence of a lot of neuroscience without proper legal or philosophical or ethical considerations, and a lot of science fiction as well. So that's just this. In Brazil, we're seeing this. We have a proposition now, but there's still a long way to go on this. And I really think this debate should be much more interdisciplinary and international.
Thank you to the four of you. There's 2 or 3 more questions. Let me read it very fast because we are 10 minutes to go. So Yeah, there's a faculty member in Brazil who is asking about engagement in undergraduate levels when compared to the graduate level. Because in her opinion, these discussions about engagement tend to be more prevalent at the graduate level. So she asked whether you have any thoughts on this, if you think there are any experiences or insights that you can offer on this matter. And there's another question. Feel free to answer to any of the questions I'm reading. There's another question about tensions in between ethics that guide advanced neurotech and neuroscience, but maybe take away from more basic neurological needs and simple non-technological solutions. This is a common tension about all over the world. So the attendee says that this is similar with codifying a right to access for these cutting-edge products and insufficient resources to allocate. How do, the attendee asked, how do the panelists think about doing better with this tension? There's also a question for Karen, but maybe if you have any thoughts on any of these two questions I've just read, I would be glad to hear about this.
I would like to briefly address the first. I think the last question is $1 million question because it is a problem for everybody, and indeed much remains to be done. And I think it would be nice to kind of all of us talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to first address the issue by the faculty member, the question by the faculty member. In my experience, something that I have heard come from a number of students, sometimes postdocs, is that they wish they had been introduced to these topics much earlier in their educational trajectory. So I think that if somebody has the opportunity to engage undergraduate students in these topics, that is absolutely fantastic. Now, the question, of course, is how to do it. And there are a number of options that, and right now, I think that we're at the stage in which people are trying to be as creative as possible. It's not just a question of giving a talk. It's a question of really trying to make them feel that they have to make decisions, that they are part of a decision. And there are a number of new techniques. So I would be more than happy to contact, or if the faculty member wants to contact me offline, I would be more than happy to tell her some of the things that I know are being done and that could be used in the context of an undergraduate class. But I think that is a fantastic idea and certainly would be great if more people can do it.
Thank you, Arleen. Any further thoughts?
Yeah. Yes, just quick addressing this first question as well. I've always found it very useful to do case studies. There are thousands of case studies that are intuition pumps that, get the students thinking about, wow, what is this? Especially when you get into, brain tumors and weird behavior and all this kind of stuff, makes them question a lot of their dualistic, intrinsic thoughts. And that's always helpful to start the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Renato. There's also a question specifically addressed to Karen. The attendee says that often there is a tendency in science to focus on figuring out how to convince, so to speak, the public to accept the science and technology being released along with a Western or Eurocentric point of view of what the guiding ethics should be. How can the scientific community better engage with cultural mindsets like those you present from Mexico without trying it to just convince?
Yeah, okay. Well, I will say that first of all, we need to be aware and be mindful and be humble to understand that the person in front of us is actually a human person. It's not some patient. It's a human person with real fears. What I think is if we ask what fears are those, we might usually find that it's because they think that if they accept a biological basis of the disorder or disease, will neutralize the rest of the human dimensions. So it's sometimes when you just explain that of course it's a brain in a body, and this body relates in a variety of anthropological variables, and that's who we are. Then this the importance of a biological basis, but it stands that it's not, that we are not, it avoids neuroreductionism. So that's kind of the main fear. So I think that explaining to them this part, and explaining to them, because sometimes they, like, if they want ethnopharmacology instead of biomedicine, that is, like herbs and herbal medicine instead of Western medicine, and then you explain to them, because they say it's the same thing to have, I don't know, chamomile than some anti-inflammatory medicine. And when you explain to them that yes, it's the same basis, but what it's, it's a better compound or whatever, sometimes they're like, can I try for 2 days my herbal stuff, and if it doesn't work, then I come back to you. And okay, we negotiate that. And in 2 days, they come back and try the medicine that I was suggesting at first. So if we are humble enough and take the time to try to understand what their fears are and explain to them as much as we can, then I think that our job is to give the information, all the information that we can and have, so that person can make an informed decision, which is his or her right. I don't think that convincing, I totally agree with the person who asked this question. We do not have to convince, we just give information and let them have to make an informed decision. It's their right as a patient. I hope I try to I hope I just answer what your question.
Thank you, Karen. It seems like Abel wants to add something.
I just wanted to say something about the remaining question, which was about non-neurotechnological solutions to mental health problems, and I think that's the key question. And I have been thinking a lot about that regarding, for instance, mental privacy and psychological integrity and so on. And I and many people agree that there's no knockout argument or idea to show that neurotechnological interventions pose unique threats to mental health that are not shared by other technologies, digital technologies, or other technologies. So I think, however, there is lawmakers and most people in the community, neurorights community, or many people in the neurorights community, still want to develop regulations that are exclusively focused on neurotechnology. I have been talking with many people. Well, why don't we include pharmacological technologies or digital technologies? Now in Chile, we are developing. We are discussing and developing AI regulation, and it obviously involves many of the issues that we are discussing in the context of neurorights. But however, they want to keep those proposals apart, and I'm not sure if there are political reasons or practical reasons, but I think that is important, that there are not very clear reasons why neurotechnologies impose unique threats, and that would be a good reason to try to develop a comprehensive regulation.
Thank you, Abel. So we are approaching the end of this discussion, but before that, let me share with all of you, speakers, attendees, the poll results. Okay, there we go. So now, as you can see, Yes, the word that clearly dominates, the reply that clearly dominates this question is the work culture. It is not surprising, maybe for me, because I will probably answer the same. I don't know why, but by instinct, I will probably answer the same. But I don't know. What do you think about it? Because as Arleen and many of you have mentioned, the work culture and the meaning of the work culture is quite problematic. So any thoughts on these results?
Briefly, I'm not surprised either, but I think that we have to be aware that culture refers not only to social anthropological cultures, but also to disciplinary cultures. For example, one thing that sometimes is difficult within neuroethics, it was before somebody mentioned the multi and interdisciplinarity of neuroethics. And yet, one of the problems that sometimes happens, one of the things we experience within neuroethics is that the different disciplines might be actually working in parallel, but not together. And that is because of the different cultures, because they have even different philosophers have a different language, or certainly the language of philosophers is not the language of neuroscientists, nor is it the language of attorneys, and so on. So I think that I agree. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I think we have to continue working on the fact that culture refers to many things. It's not just, it's not necessarily related to traditions based on a certain sociological considerations, but also it may have to do with other things as well.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Arleen. So, time to close. It will be impossible for me to summarize all of your mind-blowing comments and insights. This was very, 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 very useful. I will be thinking about it in the next days, and will try to put some order in my head, because this brought a lot of interesting questions to my head. But I think that there are important questions that have been addressed today. Maybe not definitive answers, as it is the logical thing. But for example, I think that an important question discussed here today is why is integrating contextual perspectives essential within international debates on neuroethics. And we have talked about the presence of neuroethics across borders. We have talked about cultural and ethical pluralism, challenges pending, such as the focus on the international component. We have been hearing about the words culture and context, and there are many different meanings and implications relating the country of origin, economic systems, social systems, politics, individual factors, and so on. There's also we have also to stress, as some of you have stressed before, the importance of breaking down language barriers in neuroethics, and when it comes to cross-cultural engagement. We have also seen how there's increasingly higher amount of groups and centers working in neuroethics and neurolaw in all of your countries and in many more countries within the Latin American region. It is also undeniable that regardless of national differences, there are very important shared legal issues such as affirmative action, as mentioned by Renato, which impact our societies in different ways. And we have also, of course, heard about all this work being doing in Latin America regarding neural rights, such as the constitutional amendment in Chile, bills, protection remedies, which are probably will be historical in terms of jurisprudence in the future. I mean, in short, there are so many issues to discuss, so many issues to think about, and I feel absolutely grateful to the four of you for your insightful comments. So thank you so much. And Leah will probably want to give some final words to all of you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. We really appreciate the four of you, and thank you, Jose, for all your work organizing and putting this together. You know, one thing that comes to mind is, especially for those of us, you know, in the global north, in the US and abroad, during our education, I think this came up a few times, both undergrad and graduate, for scientists as well as people in the humanities, a lot of the focus tends to be on our national or regional or even sort of global area focused perspectives, and we hear less frequently of perspectives from other parts of the world. And so I think this is a really key moment in time early in some of these global debates, to use your word rather than international, about neuroethics, to get some perspectives from other parts of the world that sometimes are considered a monolith. And I think one thing we heard today is all of these different ways in which the cultural contexts within Latin America are different, and the ways in which they influence, even within one country, the way that neuro rights or neuroethics is interpreted and understood. So for those who have joined us, we want to thank you. This will be posted online for viewing in the future, and feel free to go to the Kabbali Center for Ethics, Science, and the Public website to catch the recording of this at a future date. And with that, I will close out the webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.